Welcome everybody to Automoc's Patch Tuesday breakdown for October. And thank you all for joining us for this monthly feature. We are thrilled that you can join us today, and we have got a session packed with information for you. My name is Eric Feldman, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Automox, and I'll be covering some of the critical Patch Tuesday updates. We are joined by the incomparable Adam Whitman, who is a senior solutions engineer here at Automox. Adam, please say hello.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Whitman. I'm one of the solutions engineers at Automox, and it's really great to be here. I used to do these all the time, back in the earlier days of Automox, so it's great to be back and do some demoing again today. So thanks for having me, Eric.
Oh, you're welcome, Adam. We're thrilled to have you. And Adam's going to be discussing using Automox worklets to help with key security functions. Automox worklets empower security and IT teams to create, automate, and enforce any custom tasks that they can imagine on Microsoft Windows, Linux, or Mac OS endpoints. Now, before we dive in, there are a few housekeeping items I want to address. We use the On24 platform for our webinars, and there's a few tips that we can go over to help you maximize your viewing experience. Now, what you're watching here is the slide window, which is the primary viewing pane for the session, and we'll be walking through the Patch Tuesday updates and the presentation. Now you can resize this as you see fit. Now also everyone's muted so that we can cover a lot of information in a very short period of time. Now notice on the bottom you'll see a QA box. That's where you're going to submit any questions you may have. And Adam's going to run through some live screenshots, and you're going to see that in a separate screen. It's towards the upper right, and you can also close that or open it, and you can click a little button there to resize that. So just to give you an idea for those that haven't been with us before. So what's on the agenda for today? Well, in the Patch Tuesday series, we organize and prioritize high impact issues, offering the most vital information that impacts your environment. We're going to begin with an overview of Microsoft's October patches. And while our focus is critical vulnerabilities related to Microsoft, we're also going to cover some critical vulnerabilities from Google, an update from Adobe and Apple. And then we're going to get into the Microsoft critical vulnerabilities in detail. Now, once we're done with the Patch Tuesday content, Adam is going to take us through using Automox worklets to enhance your security posture, and he'll show you how to configure specific attributes and functions. As always, we will have plenty of time for any questions, and I mentioned the QA box. Now, typically people wait for the end to have questions, but don't do that. As you hear something or you see something, put the question right away. Don't wait to the end, and this way we can queue them up and we'll be able to take them on in order. And so as you think about them, we'll get into that. Now, before we get into the critical vulnerabilities, I want to speak a bit about Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It happens every October, and this is co-led by the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, known as CISA, and the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Hard to believe, but Cybersecurity Awareness Month is in its 18th year, and it's a collaborative effort between government and industry to help raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity all across the United States. And the goals are to ensure that all Americans have the resources they need to be safer and more secure online, while increasing the resilience of the nation against cyber threats. Now, even though the focus is on the United States, this safety theme is applicable anywhere in the world. The overarching theme this year for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is do your part, be cyber smart. In other words, every individual and organization has a role in protecting their part of cyberspace. If everyone does their part, for example, implementing stronger security practices, raising community awareness, training employees, or even educating your friends and family, our interconnected world will be safer and more resilient for everyone. So let's get into let's review the vulnerabilities for October. Well, as everyone knows, we're well into the fall season, And the month of October, think of the themes of October. There's a bountiful harvest for those who work in agriculture, and pumpkin picking and hay rides for those of us who reside in more suburban areas. But October is also Halloween here in the United States, with its corresponding amusement park, fright fests, and horror movies on classic TV channels, and spook shows and live haunted houses all over. Fortunately, our worst nightmares did not come true, with a relatively light number of critical and tonal vulnerabilities. So, as a result, your environment should not turn into a house of horrors. There were 74 vulnerabilities reported by Microsoft, 3 of which were rated as critical. There was 1 exploited vulnerability, and while this was only rated as high, it is nonetheless important as it involves the Microsoft Windows operating system. In addition, there were 3 vulnerabilities rated as high that were publicly disclosed. The trend for the total number of Microsoft vulnerabilities is stable. October's number of 74 is slightly below the monthly average of 77 for the year. Good news for all IT ops and SecOps professionals is the trend for critical vulnerabilities. October's total of 3 not only matches September's low point for the year, but it represents a 66% reduction of critical vulnerabilities, the monthly average of critical vulnerabilities. And this trend looks solid when we see that October's critical vulnerability number represents a 46% reduction compared to a 6-month moving average. So fortunately, we have less vulnerabilities and less fires to put out in our environment. Now, in addition to Microsoft, we're going to review 2 zero-day vulnerabilities impacting Google Chrome, 1 level 2 update from Adobe Acrobat, and an operating system update from Apple. Now, as a general rule, and we're going to repeat this a few times during the session today, Automox recommends that all critical and exploited vulnerabilities are patched within a 72-hour window, in particular those highlighted this month. And with a lighter load than average, this month, hopefully, SecOps and IT teams will not see their patching activities turned into Fright Night. All right, promise that's the last of the Halloween puns. Let's talk about Adobe first. Adobe has released a security update for several versions of Acrobat and Reader for both Microsoft Windows and the Mac OS. APS B21-104, this is a priority 2 rating vulnerability and includes arbitrary code executions and privilege escalation vulnerabilities of both critical and moderate severity. While not the highest remediation priority, those rated level 2 from Adobe do require some attention. Priority 2 vulnerabilities, well, they have no known exploits, and Adobe has communicated that they do not anticipate any imminent exploits. So as a result, they recommend administrators install the update, quote unquote, soon, which essentially means within 30 days. So it's important, but not necessarily urgent, these particular vulnerabilities from Adobe. Now let's get into something that is urgent. On September 30th, Google released Chrome version 94.0.4606.71 for Windows, Mac, and Linux to fix 4 vulnerabilities, 2 of which are zero-day vulnerabilities being actively exploited in the wild. CVE 2021-37975 is a high-severity, quote, use after free, unquote, vulnerability in V8, the open-source JavaScript and WebAssembly engine for Chrome. A use after free vulnerability is an incorrect use of dynamic memory by a program, which may allow an attack to corrupt data, crash programs, or execute arbitrary code. CVE 2021-37976 is a medium severity vulnerability only referenced as a information leak in core by Google. However, it could allow a remote attacker to obtain potentially sensitive information from process memory via a crafted HTML page. As mentioned, there's this new Google Chrome version 94.0.4606.71, which addresses these zero-day vulnerabilities for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And since they're remediated by this update, Automox recommends immediately updating Google Chrome. Next up is an update from Apple. They have released iOS 15.02 and iPadOS 15.02 to fix a zero-day vulnerability that is actively exploited in the wild, with attacks targeting iPhones and iPads. The vulnerability outlined in CVE-2021-30883 allows an application to execute arbitrary code with kernel privileges, possibly enabling a hacker to have complete and unrestricted access to the underlying hardware, thus executing any CPU instruction and reference any memory address. Now, this impacts the kernel, and kernel mode is generally reserved for the lowest level, most trusted functions of the operating system. In this particular vulnerability, kernel privileges can be achieved by using a memory corruption issue in the IO mobile frame buffer component. While Apple does not typically discuss or confirm security issues until an investigation has occurred, Automox recommends prioritizing the update of all Apple mobile devices to the latest OS. All right, let's get into the Microsoft updates in detail. First up are the critical vulnerabilities. CVE 2021-38672 and CVE 2021-40461. These are a pair of critical vulnerabilities found in Windows Hyper-V, a native hypervisor that can create and run virtual machines on x86 or 64-bit systems running Windows. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability could allow a malicious guest VM to read kernel memory in the host. To trigger this vulnerability, the guest VM requires a memory allocation error to first occur on the guest VM. This bug could be used for a VM escape from guest to host. Neither vulnerability has been exploited publicly, and exploitation is less likely. However, organizations using Hyper-V should patch these vulnerabilities as soon as possible. Next up is CVE 2021-40486. This is a Microsoft Word remote code execution vulnerability impacting Microsoft Office, Word, and some versions of SharePoint. This vulnerability is not new to Microsoft, and there have been several other similar CVEs documented this year. A remote code execution vulnerability exists in some Microsoft software when it fails to properly handle objects in memory. With a low attack complexity, this vulnerability requires a user opening a specially crafted file either by email or via a website, either hosted by the attacker or through a compromised website that accepts or host user-provided content. An attacker who successfully exploits this vulnerability can use this file to perform actions in the context of the current user. For example, the file could take actions on behalf of the login user with the same permissions as the current user. Automox recommends patching all critical vulnerabilities within a 72-hour window, as we mentioned in the beginning. Now, this is a great example of cybersecurity awareness. Right? Be smart, be cyber smart. Don't open files if you're not 100% positive of their origin. Okay, next we're going to look at one exploited vulnerability that we want to highlight for immediate action. CVE 2021-40449 is an important priority privilege execution vulnerability found in Microsoft Windows Win32K process. This vulnerability has been exploited in the wild and is noted as a low complexity, more likely to be exploited vulnerability. 40449 could be used to elevate user privileges on the device once compromised. Privilege elevation attacks can be used to access beyond what the current user context of the device would allow, enabling attackers to perform unauthorized action, delete or move data, view private information, or install malicious software. So the vulnerability could be elevated to administrator level. So this one's important, and you should take care of it as soon as possible. Next up, there are a few publicly exposed vulnerabilities that we'd like to highlight. First up is CVE 2021-40469. This is a remote code execution vulnerability in the Windows domain name system. You know it as DNS server. This is not the first time that Microsoft needed to remediate a vulnerability in the DNS server for a similar vulnerability this year. This time, the vulnerability impacts various versions of Windows 7, 8.1, and 10, as well as Windows Server. A successful attacker that exploits this vulnerability could run arbitrary code on the endpoint, but they need to have administrative privileges before they can exploit this vulnerability meaningfully or in a meaningful way. However, there's still a significant risk because no user interaction is required and no special endpoint connections are required for an attack to succeed. There are no reports that this vulnerability has been actively exploited, yet a rapid patch rollout is still advised because it has been publicly disclosed in a proof of concept. CVE 2021-41335. This is an elevation of privilege vulnerability that exists when the Windows kernel fails to properly handle objects in memory. The vulnerability has been publicly disclosed in a proof of concept, showing how successful exploitation could allow an attacker to run arbitrary code in kernel mode. This would enable an attacker to install programs, view, change, or delete data, or create accounts with full user rights. To exploit this vulnerability, an attacker would first have to log into the system and then run a specially crafted application to take control of the system. Elevation of privilege vulnerabilities like this are often an important step in the cyber kill chain and should be immediately prioritized and patched. Finally, we have CVE 2021-41338. This is a high-severity vulnerability that allows an attacker to bypass the security rules of Windows App Container Firewall. This vulnerability results in a loss of confidentiality and can be exploited without any user interaction. App containers are designed to protect against infiltration from third-party apps. They essentially isolate the runtime environment of applications with the goal of blocking malicious code. Now, given the sheer number of apps that users download, making sure that app containers cannot be compromised is important to every company's security hygiene. Since this vulnerability has already been publicly disclosed by James Forshaw of Google's Project Zero, we recommend patching in 72 hours now that an official fix isn't available. That brings us up to Microsoft's update. And once again, Automox recommends that all critical vulnerabilities are patched within a 72-hour window. This is highly recommended to maintain an effective security posture for your organization. All right. We have covered the critical vulnerabilities for this month, and now it's time to hand controls over to Adam Whitman, who is going to show how Automox Worklets can help improve your security and help you do your part and be cyber smart. Adam, you have the con.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Really good rundown on all those different vulnerabilities that are out in the wild for Microsoft this month, and also other third-party applications and other OSs. You know, this is a cross-platform problem that we have to solve, and it takes more than just one layer of security to do that. You know, there's different ways to be exploited from the simplest manners. Things like not having user passwords set correctly. That's a simple thing that is often overlooked, and a lot of IT admins really focus on the more complex types of security solutions like EDR or advanced network configurations to protect your environment, when really it's the more simple things that attackers are going after, because that's a very easy way for them to get in and start laterally moving through your system. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on some of those OS level security policies to really help you protect your endpoint when these exploits arise. And the way we're going to do and demonstrate that today is using an Automox worklet. And a lot of you on the call today know what a worklet is, have used worklets before. But those who don't know, a worklet within Automox is a unit of work. So you have some sort of remediation action that needs to be completed in your environment. then you can use Automox worklet to be able to dynamically push that configuration or that change to your endpoint, no matter where that endpoint is located. Let me use the slide reel here. Okay, all right. So we'll talk about enforcing different security policies, right? And it's really important to constantly check and enforce different security policies across your various endpoints. Patching is a big piece of protecting your devices from these different exposures by remediating CVEs regularly with the software packages provided by the vendor. And by doing that, you'll reduce your attack surface to your endpoints by 80%. But there's other things that have to be done in order to protect your endpoints fully from these different exploits. And a lot of these exploits are done to bad configurations, things like passwords or RDP being open or applications being installed that are dangerous that shouldn't be installed. Things that users are doing all the time to greater infect those devices in your environment. And they can be really dangerous attacks. We saw in the Oldsmar attack that happened in Florida a while back that they attacked a critical infrastructure that was responsible for a lot of the purification and supply of the water in that county. And the attacker literally got control and started rising dangerous levels of toxins within those different water supplies in an attempt to poison the water supply. I mean, this is not some sort of ransomware. This is killware. This is an exploit that is causing life to potentially be lost because of this exploit. And it's all due to simple things like, remote access being enabled, bad out-of-date OSs, like running Windows 7 devices, not protecting passwords and passwords being shared amongst users. These are simple things. These aren't complex configurations that you have to do across your infrastructure to protect against these very complex exploits. No, these are just, I didn't have a password set correctly and then I got exploited. Now, luckily in this example, a worker saw it happening in real time and was able to react. But if that user doesn't see that action happening, then water supplies are poisoned and then actual life could be lost due to this exploit. So it's really important to cover these bases on a regular cadence to make sure that users are adhering to what your policy and security best practices are for your organization. Okay, so today what I want to demonstrate is using Automox worklets to maintain endpoint security postures. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to be disabling some remote access. So in this case, and the use case on the Oldsmar attack is they gained access to TeamViewer passwords and were able to use TeamViewer to gain access to those different systems. So we're going to run a few policies across an endpoint to uninstall TeamViewer across that device, and also to disable remote desktop on the endpoint itself to ensure that it's not attacked through an RDP exploit. And then we're also going to be managing some user passwords, so checking current configurations that users are using on a system, and if they're not adhering to our security best practices, to enforce a change on that endpoint and make that user enforce strong password complexities when setting their passwords. So I will go ahead and share my screen out. Just give me 1 second. Okay. And Eric, just pipe in. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep. It's live right now.
All right, guys. So what we're looking at is on the left-hand side, the Automox console. And the view we're looking at is a device details view. So we're looking at this specific Windows 10 device, and we're looking at all the configurations and all the system details that are related to this endpoint. And you're also going to get a view into this endpoint. You can see my virtual machine here on the right. This is the Windows OS, and this is the one we're going to be running the tests against. So the first action we want to check is to see if TeamViewer is installed, and if it is, to remove it from the OS, and then to also disable remote access. We're going to kill two birds with one stone in this worklet by ensuring that no remote access can be done from any applications or anything native on the OS. So you can see that we have some worklets that are already associated with this device. the one I want you to pay attention to is the uninstall TeamViewer and disable remote access worklet. And we can see that this worklet is currently pending an update, meaning that when it evaluated, it saw TeamViewer or remote access enabled or both. So we know an action needs to be taken, and whenever this policy is scheduled to run, it's going to remediate that endpoint and do the actions it needs to do. But for our demo, let's go ahead and force some remediation. So I'm going to go ahead and run this on the device. And when I actually push that run on device button, it's going to force immediate remediation on that endpoint. So we're going to queue a command to the endpoint, and then we're going to be able to execute that across the device. So it happened pretty quickly here before I got over to the other side, but you probably saw TeamViewer get removed on the right-hand side. TeamViewer is an application that was installed. We saw a shortcut on the desktop, but as soon as we ran this worklet, it automatically removed that application from the OS. So if we search TeamViewer now, it's been completely removed from that worklet. And also what this worklet has done is it has disabled remote desktop on the OS level. And it does that by making a direct reg value change to the endpoint. So if we go to the registry for this device and we check one registry entry here, and it's called the F-deny TS connections, we can see that it had a value of 0, or excuse me, a value of 1, meaning remote access was enabled. But now that we've ran our worklet, we can see that the F-deny TS connection reg value has a value of 1 set, meaning that remote access has been disabled, and we know that our worklet has functioned the way it should have. So simply by clicking this button, we went ahead and made sure all of my devices across my environment have TeamViewer uninstalled, so removing that exploit, and then also ensuring that we disable remote access to the endpoint. Now, from the console view, you can see that we're refreshing, but if you go to the reports page, you're going to be able to see where that worklet actually ran on the endpoint. So you can see that we ran this worklet right here, and that it successfully removed TeamViewer and also disabled remote desktop on the system. So we had a successful run indicated by the activity log, and we've taken care of those different exploits. Now let's go back to the device real fast and just take a look to see what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and go back to my device here. And we can see that it is still refreshing, but we can also see that the uninstalled TeamViewer has been, and disable remote worklet has been ran and has a green check mark next to it. And that indicates that we had a successful run. We reevaluated the device to make sure it's adhering to that worklet. And we know that this policy now successfully remediated. So it's easy as that to actually check specific configurations, enforce them across your endpoints, and ensuring all your devices are maintaining those different configurations. Okay, Eric, I think we're good now to go ahead and turn it back over to you. That was the demonstration of remediating AutoMox and devices through worklets.
All right, Adam, and thank you for going over that. And as I said, worklets enable you to automate almost any task, and it also will help you with the theme of this month's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Will help you do your part and be cyber smart. Okay, let's move over to questions, and we've got a bunch that we can start with, and let's start with John. Ask a question. Adam, I'm going to ask you to respond to this. Is there an automated process for updating W10 to 21H1? I'm not sure the reference. Yep. W10 Windows, is that Windows 10?
Yep, exactly. So AutoMox supports feature updates. So if you wanted to go from 21H1 to 21H2 or 1909 to directly to 21H2, you can definitely do that. You can use a regular AutoMox patch policy, and as long as the device is advertising a feature update to install as part of its software inventory, then we can just take that into AutoMox and apply that to the OS and handle all the reboots with just native patch policies. So test it out, get a patch policy on a machine that has an advertised 21H1 upgrade, and then run the policy, and it will patch that for you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Christopher asks, is there an agent currently available for Windows 11?
Yep. Yeah, great question, Christopher. And right now we're in the middle of testing it. Our agent's running fine on Windows 11, and we're able to see softwares and apply them regularly. So great success. Not officially supported yet, but we will have 0-day support, or plan to have 0-day support for Windows 11 when it comes out. Not official yet, but we have seen our agent working on Windows 11 much like it runs on any of those other Windows versions. So soon to have full support for Windows 11.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Harold asks, I'll take this one. Is this webinar going to be recorded and links sent out? Absolutely, Harold. We do that with all our webinars. In fact, if you want to review some of our past Patch Tuesday content, you can find it on our website. Just look for Patch Tuesday Central, and you'll see all the videos there. So this one will be there as soon as we get it staged up. Next up, Cassandra asks, any word on auto-updating Acrobat falling in with the out-of-box policy? Do we still need to use the community worklet?
Yeah, and I saw a few questions. John, you asked a question about this as well, and we are working on support for Adobe Acrobat Reader natively with patch policies. Still has to be handled through worklets on a lot of use cases, but we are going to have support for MUI Adobe pretty soon. So that's coming. We're testing that right now. It should be released in a few weeks. But we are working hard to have full Adobe Acrobat Reader support with patch policies. But currently, you still kind of need to use worklets to accomplish that.
Okay, so we support Adobe via a worklet policy as opposed to a full patch policy, right?
Correct.
Okay, and there doesn't seem to be any more questions, so let's just give it another couple of seconds there. And by the way, just a quick note: you brought up the Oldsmar issue, and just want to be clear that, to my knowledge, there was no specific inherent issue or with the TeamViewer application itself. The hackers that gained access to the City of Oldsmar auto supply may have used TeamViewer, but it was poor policy. It was poor password policy and reusing those passwords that enabled the hacker to gain access. It wasn't any exploit or vulnerability in TeamViewer itself. So I just want to make that clear. TeamViewer was not at fault. It was the password policies that appeared to be the issue. So I think hopefully that came out in our presentation today. And by the way, if you go to the Automox website, look for blogs. There are several blogs where we discuss protecting critical infrastructure and with some case studies. And Oldsmar is in one of the blogs. I believe I wrote it back in March or May, whenever that issue came out. So check that out if you're interested in some of the case studies that we found. And we publish blogs on a regular basis of all types. I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we can close out for this month. On behalf of Adam, thank you for a terrific presentation. I'm really excited in what worklets can do and how they can help everyone be do their part and be cyber smart. Well, one last minute question, and then we'll call it a month. Paul asks, how do you handle the patching of Java 8? Does the client need to get the bits from Java?
Yeah, absolutely. So Automox will pull those down when we do the patching from the vendor. So we get the bits directly from the vendor every time we apply the patch, right? So we'll index the third-party apps. We'll then pull them from the vendor, and then we'll perform the install against them.
Okay, great. Any other last-minute questions? Now's the time. But I think we're done. I really appreciate everyone's time and joining us for this month. Hopefully you didn't you didn't mind the Halloween puns, but do your part. Be cyber smart. We thank you so much for joining us this month. We hope we're bringing you good content and something that's important and effective for you. On behalf of Adam and everyone here at Automox, we thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And we look forward to speaking with you again and look forward to Patch Tuesday's webinar next month in November. Thank you, everyone.